Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is April 23rd, 2025, and we'll be talking about how the DCA into power law following assets such as Bitcoin and Kaspa is coming along. So, as I'm writing this, Bitcoin is trading a little bit above 93,500, and Kaspa is trading about 9.5 cents. And we've seen quite a little bit of jump and action in the last few days. And as always, this is not financial advice. Do your own research. So let's start off with a quick review of what power law following assets are. If you take the price of an asset and plot it in the log space, that is, you take a log of the price and a log of the time, power law following assets come across as having a high trend line, a strong trend line, and show up as a linear line in the log space. So in this case, this is for Bitcoin. From the beginning of Bitcoin's history, you find that the blue line, which is the price, tracks the orange line quite nicely. That's represented by this equation over here with an R squared of 0.9658, which means about 96% of the variation in the price is explained by this trend line. And we have about 5,500 days of data. When we take this data in the log plane and convert it into the normal graphs that we're used to, which are linear in time and price, we end up with a curve like this. And then based upon this, we can end up making a prediction. If the future is like the past, what is the price performance likely to be? And so on the basis of these numbers that I've calculated, and different people will have different numbers based on the data set that they use and how they fill in blank spaces, etc., we can have an expected return for the next year to be about 70%, with an anticipated price 1 year from now, if the price remains on trend, to be about $158,000. And the expected return from today's price would be about 70%. And right now, this says 15% discount to trend. That means we are trading below the trend line by about 15%. And if we were trading on the trend line, according to this, we'd be probably about 110, 108, yeah, between 109 and 110,000, depending on exactly where in the month we are. So call it about 110. So that gives you an idea of why this technique is so powerful. We see we have this strong trend line. We can use that to extrapolate what we think prices are going to be like in the future and make investment decisions based upon that. Similarly, one of the assets that follows a trend line very strongly, or was following it for a long time, was Kaspa. And Kaspa had a trend line that was very tightly following this too. And now that has dropped down considerably. The R squared is around 0.94, I think, when I started doing this project. And now it's dropped down to 0.896 or 0.8906. And we can see a lot of that is because the price has dropped way below what this trend line said it should be at this particular time point. However, we have about less than 1/5 of the data for Bitcoin, so we should have less confidence in them in the numbers that we get out from this. However, just using this as a proxy and saying, okay, this is our best guess is what the price is going to be. If we go ahead and look forward 1 year into the future, we come up with an anticipated price of about 71 cents for each Kaspa, right? And that would be an expected return of about 650%, which is quite substantial. You can see that the equation for Kaspa is quite different from that for Bitcoin. And you can work out the math and you see that it gives us a really strong growth rate at this point in this trajectory. So the big issue, of course, has become that since we've only got about 1/5 of the data, we can't have as much confidence in it, but we have a much higher potential return. So how do we balance that out? And for this reason, I had developed this thing called the Power Law Investor Allocation. It's a triangle that switches between Kaspa, Bitcoin, and cash. And basically, I simplified this down and decided just to use about a 60% allocation to Kaspa, a 20% allocation to Bitcoin, and a 20% allocation to cash. And the reason for cash is because every now and then we're going to have serious dips in the price. So for example, with Bitcoin, you can see recently that it had dropped down way down into the 70s. And if you don't have any cash ready to deploy, then you aren't able to take advantage of such opportunities like that. And given the volatility in crypto, that is a good thing. However, to balance that, At the same time, we need to have a strategy that allows us to continually buy so that we can build up a position in these assets. And so, for this reason, we have a daily DCA amount that kicks in. So, it initially started off as being $100 a day, and that was split between Bitcoin, Kaspa, and cash. This I've simplified now, like I said, to 20% Bitcoin, 60% Kaspa, and 20% cash. And as you can see over time, as the prices have changed, this allows us to buy more when the price is low, because the $100 buys more Kaspa, for example, when the price is low, and less when the price is high. So that over time drags down the average buying price, right? And as the price had dropped down, I decided to increase the allocation from $100 a day to $200 a day. And recently, and we started doing that about towards the end of December. And recently, in my last video, I didn't actually make this explicit, so I haven't changed it as yet, but I am actually going to be increasing this to $300 a day. The reason is that I think Caspa and the entire crypto system is ready to take off, right? If we see how the if we see how what the structure of prices has been typically, we see that every 4 years, about a year after the halving, the prices really start to take off. And the halving was about a year ago in April, I think, right? And so we can find an example from that. Let's just look at the Bitcoin price, right? You find that there's a surge over here, and then you find that there was another surge also. So this is about 2020, about 4 years ago, would be about 21, and you can see that the prices have increased quite dramatically, right? And so every 4 years, you sort of expect the prices to go above the trend line. And if that's the case, then we want to be prepared in order to do that. And right now, we're below the trend line in Bitcoin, and we're way below the trend line in Caspa. And I'll talk a little bit about Caspa in a bit, but basically going forward, I'm increasing this to $300 a day, and as such. And also the 20% cash that we've been saving. I've put in a limit order for that, which I had mentioned earlier in my last update on the DCA strategy, is that I'd put it around 5 cents. We got 0.053 cents, which was really close. So I'm putting in explicitly an order here. Let's make this yellow because it hasn't been fulfilled as yet. That I'll have a limit order for half of whatever cash is available at that time. And the reason I do this very transparently is because I can't predict the future, right? But I can make risk adjusted bets based on what I think is the most likely outcome. And at this point, I know that I want to increase my exposure, but I also want to keep this cash available in case we get another crash, because things are quite unpredictable right now with what's happening in the overall financial markets. And if that opportunity does come along, I want to not only deploy the cash, but also have some left in case we get some crazy, crazy prices. And every time I come up with one of these and say, oh, this price is absolutely insane, it's not going to happen, that happens, right? If you look at all these limit orders that I've placed in the past, they all ended up hitting. And so I've also got this limit order placed here. And what's really interesting to note over here, let me take a step back and talk a little bit about Caspa here, right? Is that we've seen this crazy jump in Caspa prices just in the last couple of days. And from about, we were almost at 5 cents about 2 weeks ago. And now we're all the way up to 9 cents. So that's an example of how fast the market can move. And we've sort of seen that same thing happen with Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin price has jumped. So when the Bitcoin price jumped from the 8th, let's say, to now 8th, when it was about, oh, this is the market cap. Let's do BTC USD. When it jumped from about $75,000 all the way up to $95,000 or $93,000, which is right now, the entire altcoin markets also move along with it, which is what we saw with Caspa. And so what's likely going to happen, if we look back and say, hey, what is the power law telling us? The power law is telling us that we should be, in about the end of this year, in a year's time, over here for Bitcoin, we're going to be about 158,000, right? And that's the best mathematically derived guess. It's not myself just drawing lines on a chart. it's what this is expected to be up here, right? About 158,000. And if we have that, we're also going to see a corresponding burst in assets and altcoins. Now, the timing for that can be a little tricky, but typically we'll have Bitcoin peaking and then the altcoins will follow closely after that as people want to get something that is increasing at even a faster rate. So that's sort of the altcoin logic. With Kaspa, we know that it was following the power law, and then we can say that power law is definitely disrupted. Whether it's broken permanently or not, we don't know. But from a variety of metrics, Kaspa has a fair degree of potential. Not only was it following the power law, but it has some relatively unique technology and a very active community, and sort of deals with the trilemma in a very unique way, right? So it's decentralized and it's very quick. So based on that, I think it is a reasonable bet to place. Now, you might want to play it something more dynamically or something with a higher risk reward ratio like meme coins. Those are a little harder to predict, not just a little, but a lot harder. I have been doing a little bit of research into that, and I think I have a way to try and identify high potential meme coins, although the price action is quite difficult to predict, but at least we can see which ones have quite the high potential. And so I will talk about that in a future video. Um, but looking back at Caspa, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect maybe a 5x from where the current prices are right now, even if you don't follow what the power law is saying. This would imply at least a 7x. It's hard to know because the power law has been disrupted and there's all these new technological changes coming through with Caspa all the time. But if you do run that through, you do want to have exposure to Caspar, right? And which is why if you look at this DCA strategy, it allows us to take advantage of lower prices, which is what we've been having, but at the same time keeps us exposed every day by increasing the amount that we're buying. So right now, the average of the Caspa paid is just above nine and just below 10 cents, which is very close to the price right now. And the strategy, which had been at a loss for quite a while, you can see the overall percentage return had been 30, 28, 29. Given the recent jump in Caspa prices and Bitcoin prices, of course, has resulted in almost being neutral. Now, it's not positive as yet, but this is a long term strategy that you don't have to think too much about and don't have to engage your emotions too dramatically in. And that was my overall goal. So, you can imagine how much these numbers are going to change when we start getting higher Caspa prices. Now, of course, no one can predict the future. I can't predict the future. But based on what we see with Bitcoin, we expect higher prices, and that we know that Bitcoin and the alt market are correlated. We can expect higher prices coming for Caspa. And in that case, we want to have exposure. Now, do I know if it's going to be a straight line? Likely not. We may have dips, we may accelerate, but DCAing in and as well as having the opportunity to buy more at lower prices is probably the best strategy going ahead. Given what I've seen so far, I think having at least a 6 month to a 12-month time window is going to be important. We don't know how the rest of this year is going to shape up. I think it has positive implications, but likely by about the end of this year, we should see substantial prices. And one of the things that is really important to know from a psychology perspective is realize that the jumps, when they come, are going to be very high, very fast, right? So the commonly used metric is that you get about 90% of the gains in 10% of the days. So you can imagine what that's going to be like when the market does go ballistic, and it doesn't last for very long, but you can have tremendous gains in a short period of time. And the only way you know when that is going to come is by being ready, by DCAing in every day and having that exposure so there's no FOMO and you don't want to join in when you see the prices taking early off. Okay. So a couple of metrics to round this up. We are looking at Caspa over here. I had talked in a previous video that if you don't want to follow the DCA strategy, one way to avoid the lows historically has been to look at the 40-day moving average, which is here in blue, and buy when it's above the 40-day moving average and sell when it goes below the 40-day moving average, right? So the 40-day moving average right now is about 0.74 cents, and the crossover point was around 7 cents, so that would have been a good time to buy momentum wise, for those of us that don't want to do the usual DCA but just want to wait until the prices start shooting up, right? So it's trend following versus a mean reversion strategy. So you can follow that if you feel that's better for you. And of course, I'll keep you updated on those. But this 40-day moving average has been back tested, and you can look back on my video to see the details of what that is. You get better gains and you get lower losses. So it's less emotionally taxing to follow when you do the 40-day moving average. But then when the prices go really low, you just hold off. You have to hold off and have that discipline. Okay. A couple of other things to highlight here. If you look at this is Kaspa versus Bitcoin. You can see that Kaspa versus Bitcoin was dropping. Let me just eliminate this one here. And then from about the end of the first week of April to now, we've actually been doing better than Bitcoin. So whether this continues or not is really hard to say. My personal feeling is that the altcoin market is going to be a very volatile situation until quantitative tightening ends. Now, we don't know when quantitative tightening, as defined by the US Fed, is going to end, but that's when we'll start seeing an increase in the prices really start to take off, an increase in the attention. And yet another metric over here would be, how are we doing relative to the altcoin market? Well, if you look back from about quite a while, right, we haven't been doing so well. Here's when the KRC20 tokens were introduced, and you had some surges, but overall the trend has been down for quite a while, right? However, lately we seem to be coming to this area, this zone over here. Let me bring this up. That we're relatively stable versus the altcoin market from about the beginning of May. So whether this continues or not, we don't know, but it seems to be at least relatively stable for right now. And one other graph that I would like to show you guys over here is, which I talked about in a previous video, was the price of Bitcoin lagged versus the lagged M2 money supply. Now, the M2 is a measure of the money supply, the global money supply. And a number of commentators have been talking about, hey, how closely is this being tracked before? And I think one of the guys that brought it to my attention was Colin Does Crypto, and you can look back in one of my previous videos and I talk about it. And if this assertion is correct, the correlation for the last 90 days is about 85%, which is quite good. But then the correlation for the last 60 and 30 days isn't that great, right? It's only about 30%. So the idea is that when the money supply takes off, the Bitcoin price is also going to take off, which means that the Kaspa price is also likely going to be taking off. And everyone is very excited about this. Personally, I am not so sure on the timing. When I just look at these numbers over here, it doesn't give me a lot of faith that we're tracking that closely. And so you can say, hey, 90 days, if you look at a 90-day window and you lag it by 108 days, you find like, oh, there's certainly a really large correlation, but then you really should also be seeing a larger correlation in the 60 and 30 days, and I'm not seeing that, right? So I'm a little less excited about that in terms of the timing, but overall, you'll see that when M2 goes up, the Bitcoin price generally follows, and the equation that you have, the R squared explanatory variable, which I did on a previous video, is about 83%. All right, which is pretty strong evidence that generally, or 83 times out of 100, you have the Bitcoin price following the M squared or the M2 price. So I think we may not be so sure on the timing, but generally the trend is pretty strong. So we can have a strong degree of mathematical faith in that. So when you put that all together, you can see that we're in a fairly decent spot right now. And that is the reason why I think it's a good idea to start increasing the daily DCA. Do I know whether it's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month? No. But by DCAing in, as well as having cash resources to jump in when appropriate, along with the research that I've shared with you guys and talking about the following the 40-day moving average, which is now around 0.74 cents, it seems we're in a good place to make some investments into Kaspa, which is why I'm stepping things up. So This is the update right now. The average price for Kaspa is just around what the average price is. That is the average price that we've paid over the last 7 months DCAing in, and that's the power of DCA. And let's see how things turn out. So thanks for listening in. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, do put them below and I'll try and get to them. All the best.